Hello, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's Common Ground. I'm Malvika Jolly, Special Projects Associate here at the Rail, and today I'm thrilled to be welcoming a very special panel of writers, scholars, and faculty in tribute to and in celebration of the MFA program in art writing at the School of Visual Arts in New York. We're so thrilled to be welcoming Hakim Bishara, Debra Bricker Balken, Michael Brenson, Fong H. Bui, William Fenstermaker, Jessica Holmes, in absentia through the magic of the internet, Emmanuel Iduma, Nancy Princenthal, Jen Kabat, Jennifer Krasinski, and David Levi Strauss, in conversation with Charles Schultz and Anne C. Collins. And today we have the extra special treat of having Levi close us out with a poem in style. So really looking forward to that. I will mention this conversation grows out of Levi's feature in memoriam, a tribute to SVA's art writing MFA in our July-August issue, which is out currently, so I'll drop a link to that below. Finally, we've started out all of our events here at the Rail with two important acknowledgements. The first is that here in New York, we're on Lenapehoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and the Shinnecock Indian Nation. The second is an acknowledgement that Black Lives Matter, and I think it's worth taking a moment to remind ourselves that the heart of both of these acknowledgements is a commitment to the liberation of the oppressed and solidarity for all those who struggle for freedom. In that spirit, I encourage you all to check out the chat, where in a moment we will post a living document of resources and actions as we do our part. But now we'll get right into it. It's my honor to welcome our wonderful hosts. One of the most urgent and critical art writers working today, David Levi Strauss's work focuses on the intersection between image and text and the third space that is created through that interaction. He is the author of Between the Eyes, Essays on Photography and Politics, Words Not Spent Today by Smaller Images Tomorrow, Essays on the Present and Future of Photography, and many other books. His latest work is Coallusion, Dispatches from the End of Communication, which came out with MIT Press 2020. And which exposes a new iconopolitics in which words and images lose their connection to reality. He brings us this conversation today, and he's joined by regular contributor to our art scene section, Anne C. Collins. She holds a BFA in film and television from NYU and an MFA in art criticism and writing from the School of Visual Arts, which I'm sure she'll tell us about shortly. Her work has also appeared in Degree Critical and Variables West, and her film editing projects include Joan Didion, The Center Will Not Hold, Can You Bring It, Bealt T. Jones, and D-Man in the Waters, among others. She lives in Brooklyn, and today is joined by our very own writer and editor, Charles Schultz, who is managing editor of the Brooklyn Rail. Charlie, Anne, and Levi, take it away.
Thank you very much, Malvika. Very excited to be hosting with my good friend and colleague, Anne.
And I am excited to be with Charlie and to have so many people from the MFA in Art Criticism and Writing joining us today. So just to give you a little background on the MFA in Art Criticism and Writing at the School of Visual Arts, the program was started in 2005 with the great writer, critic, and scholar Thomas McEvely as chair. Tom quickly approached his friend David Levi Strauss and asked if he would like to be a part of the program. When it began in 2005, Levi taught a seminar on image and belief in the first year, and then went off to teach at the Center for Curatorial Studies at Bard College and the Bard MFA program and at Yale. In 2007, the provost of the School of Visual Arts called Levi to say that Tom was stepping down and asked him to consider taking over as chair. He said, "No, I don't do that. I'm a writer." But Provost Cyphers was persistent, and Levi finally agreed, being warned that he would be given a free hand to make it anything he wanted it to be. If it worked, he would get the credit, and if it didn't, he would get the blame. Levi says that it took him a few years to build the program into something resembling his vision of it. We're talking to him about what that vision was. And the next 15 years, it was the only MFA program in the world that concentrated on art writing and criticism. The program has graduated 112 alumni who are now out there in the world writing, editing, teaching, and making a difference. So Charlie, is going to give us a little bit more of a feel for what the heart of the program was and bring us into the world that Levi envisioned.
Yes, thank you, Anne. That was a beautiful and concise history. And I also want to thank all of our guests for joining us today. For those of you in the audience, a brief overview of how this will go. Anne and I are going to give a little introduction, and then we will circulate through our guests who will share a little bit from their experiences before we enter a roundtable sort of discussion. I really wanted to bring in the voices of two critics who were foundational to our beloved program so that the energy and intelligence of their minds could be part of our tribute today. The first is Susan Sontag from her book On Photography, published in 1977, though the essays appeared initially in the New York Review of Books. And in her acknowledgments, she writes that were it not for the encouragement of her friends, specifically Barbara Epstein, Robert Silvers, and Don Eric Levine, the essays may not have happened at all. I'm pulling here from the first essay, In Plato's Cave. This is how she ends. It would not be wrong to speak of people having a compulsion to photograph, to turn experience itself into a way of seeing. Ultimately, having an experience becomes identical with taking a photograph of it, and participating in a public event comes more and more to be equivalent to looking at it in a photographed form. The most logical of 19th century aesthetes, Mallarmé, said that everything in the world exists in order to end in a book. Today, everything exists to end in a photograph. 1977. The next quote comes from John Berger, specifically from his book, Another Way of Telling, a book about photography that Berger made in collaboration with Jean Moore, published in 1982. Berger acknowledges that this work would not have been possible without the Transnational Institute, which, according to its online profile, is an international research and advocacy institute committed to building a just, democratic, and sustainable planet. Berger was one of the first fellows of the Institute, which also initially supported his move from London to the French mountain village Quincy. Berger writes, and in life, meaning is not instantaneous. Meaning is discovered in what connects and cannot exist without development. Without a story, without an unfolding, there is no meaning. Facts can be fed into a computer and become factors in a calculation. No meaning, however, comes out of computers. For when we give meaning to an event, that meaning is a response, not only to the known, but also to the unknown. Meaning and mystery are inseparable, and neither can exist without the passing of time. Certainty may be instantaneous. Doubt requires duration. Meaning is born of the two. An instant photograph can only acquire meaning insofar as the viewer can read into it a duration extending beyond itself. When we find a photograph meaningful, we are lending it a past and a future. I framed the quotations this way to accentuate the value of friendship, of community, and to acknowledge the need for encouragement and support in the creative process. The writing program that fostered a community of creative and critical thinkers has closed, this is true, but the relationships that were developed and which form the true network of this community remain vibrantly open and are what we're celebrating today. Levi, I would like to now pass the mic to you.
Thanks, Charlie. And thanks, Anne and the Rail for doing this. The MFA program in art writing, in art criticism and writing, later called art writing, was a highly unusual program in many ways. And the fact that it lasted for 16 years is phenomenal. I think we were lucky in the venue and in the timing. I don't think we would have been able to do this anywhere but SVA, and it probably couldn't be done now for a number of reasons. I figured out early on that the secret was to choose the best teachers I could find and then leave them alone and let them teach what they cared about the most. Some of these teachers are here today, and there have been many others over the years. Some of the best critics at work today have taught in the program, and that's made all the difference. Not all excellent writers are excellent teachers, certainly, but every once in a while the two coincide. again, we were lucky. It was always difficult to find good students because of the unusual nature of the program. The students had to be more or less self-selective in the main. And there was no one ideal background or preparation for the program. So there was never any one place that we could go to find prospective students. Again, we were lucky more times than not. Students in the end came from all over the world and from every conceivable background, and many of them thrived in the program and found their way as writers. I was also lucky to find an assistant who could keep this unusual gathering of students and faculty together day to day and make it all work most of the time. Her name is Annette Warehan. We were lucky. So why do all this in the first place? As I've often said, the only real model I had for such a program was something called the Poetics program that I studied in San Francisco from 1980 to 1983. It was taught entirely by poets, for poets. It was pointedly not a creative writing program, but a program in poetics, the study of how things are made. So it could be applied to, principles could be applied to anything that was made. My main teacher in the program, the great poet Robert Duncan, said of the program, the seriousness of the study of poetics we intend is the seriousness of the study of creative events. The intention of these poets in San Francisco was to give us students an intellectual base that we could build on for the rest of our lives and sources that we could draw on into the future. And that's what we tried to do in this program. I've always been unreasonably idealistic about teaching and about what can happen in a classroom, in a seminar. That situation between a teacher and students and among students is incredibly powerful. But it turns out that it's also extremely precarious because it's all built on trust. And I'm afraid that kind of trust may be breaking down now in education as it is breaking down in the larger society. The program will live on in the writings of its students and faculty and hopefully in their own further attempts to further the cause of critical thinking. Again, thank you all for being here, and I'm anxious to hear what everyone else has to say. Thanks.
Thanks, Levi. Hakim, would you like to lead us off and share an experience?
Oh yeah, well, thank you for inviting me. And it's so nice to see my teachers and my peers and you, Levi. I wanted to share a very personal anecdote. Levi's office at the department was always open for students. Anyone could walk in and start talking with them and chatting with them. And I used to do that a lot. And there's one memory I have from one of the conversations we had there, which stuck to me like 5 years after. I was complaining to Levi about losing sleep or even denouncing sleep as a waste of time. That's something I changed my mind drastically on since then. And Levi raised his head from his table and he said, in his very known stoic manner, he said, you can lose sleep, but don't forget to dream. And I still remember you saying that, Levi. That's what I wanted to share.
That is so wonderful and so indicative of the kinds of things the oracle that was Levi's office would yield. Thank you so much. So that would be Michael. Would you like to share something with us, please?
Sure. I was trying to think about what I could say that communicated my sense of the culture of the place that we're all indebted to and committed to, and then I just felt that I probably the best way to do it was to say a couple of words about Levi and Annette. And I hope I'll only be like moderately presumptuous in what I'm saying. But, you know, thinking about Levi's, I mean, they're both creative people. Levi is, you know, is a poet. He went to Goddard and he went to the University of Rochester. So he had a background in the sort of counterculture and in critical culture in a very rigorous way of thinking about cultural politics. And then he went to San Francisco and he mentioned the poetics program. And in San Francisco, he really lived with poets and lived in a very dynamic community with poets who were politically engaged, many of them, but for whom I think the primary commitment, and you know, he'll tell me if I'm wrong, is to individual creativity and the force of individual creativity, and through that creativity, the belief that there was power and the possibility to really change the world. And Annette, I met Annette at Bard, where she came in as a printmaker, if I remember right, and then started to make paintings. And I will always think of Annette, first of all, as a painter. So you have two people running the program who were, I think, grateful to be working in an institution, but fundamentally non-institutional people, and fundamentally committed to finding languages and to making connections that that would function in a certain way in relation to power and the rest of the world, and a real belief in family, and a kind of, you know, collective way of being with one another, and in the power of the individual voice. So and the continuity of that, and a lot of what I really admire in the program, the collegiality among the faculty, the thesis advising with students, and the whole Quixote talks, which always ended in these conversations between the people who gave the talks and the students. And then, you know, how this builds out and forms a community that we're all, I think, talking about and trying to reckon with. But obviously on some basic level, it all begins with Levi and Annette.
Thank you, Michael.
Our very own Fong Bui.
Thank you, Michael. I remember very clearly when I was struggling trying to apply for grants to keep the rail alive. You did say something similar, very similar. You just now say of Levi and Annette in the similar way that Levi say about all of us teaching there in the program. Just pick the people, have great faith in them, and leave them alone. And that's exactly what you say to me, Michael. You wish those big foundations, those that run foundation, would remember having, like, make some effort to pay the rail office, getting to know the people who ride in the rail and leave the rail alone. And I think finally we have adopted that philosophy deeply, because I have incredible detest feeling for academic and institutional political correct language. I try to keep away from what we do in the rail. And so thank you for that reminder, Michael. But I remember so clearly, it might have been in the summer 2003, I called Levi David. So forgive me, I switched back and forth, but I prefer calling him David. I remember meeting David in the summer 2003 when John Watermat, one of our early editor-at-large, brought him to the rail office in Greenpoint, and followed with a beautiful interview. I was there. I didn't participate. I just simply sat there because I remember reading his first book, Dock and Wharf, and that may have been the late 90s. I was aware of Jim Fleming and his publishing company, Autonom Media, and have admired, of course, our common friend, Hakim Bey's classic book, Taz, that was 91. It's a very important book for the rail. But I remember clearly from the very beginning when John make broad observation of David's third book, Between the Eyes, which it was the subject of the conversation, she say, I'm paraphrasing her, the process of the way that David think about art, writing about art, have so much to do with opening things up, not closing things down, never declaratively pointing to specific conclusions. There is no conclusion. It's very important for me to remember that, you know, which I have to occasionally remind my colleagues in the rail. Do not spend your life looking for a conclusion. It is the process of doing it that what counts, you know? And so she said that David writing is so expensive. It's expensive to read as through his own reflection on whoever he's writing on, the artist's work. And I remember David in response saying to Joan was that he never forgot what he say ever, you know, and I remember clearly what he's want to do or try to do in relation to the artist's work is first to write something that can sit next to the work and not do violence to it. And I love that. Can you write something next to the work of art and not do violence to it, which is extremely difficult. And then secondly, I remember he tried to make something happen between them, between the visual work and the written words, to give out a feeling of elevation, vibration, upward criticality. And I also like that too, upward criticality. And from that day forth, we became immediate great friends. And I never forgot what Bozak once said too. Reading brings us unknown friends. And I always love that. Every time we get to see each other, we always discuss the book that we're reading, book that we want to read, or book that we have read but haven't really had a chance to talk about things, digest through. So I know that he's gonna be my comrade, friend, colleague for life, you know? And I don't wanna make general artificial assumption here, but I feel like all of us share the similar understanding of the need for critical judgment, you know, but we also see criticism as a practice that making finer, but yet precise distinction among and between things. And that's exactly what I appreciate, what David writing so much. We all acknowledge, I think, it's a useful process as much as for the artist whose work we are writing on, as much as general reader. And we keep reminding ourselves every time we undertake a new writing project and whatnot. It's that part of us, what keeps us feeling so challenged, and yet at times very ecstatic, is the possibility of shaping our thoughts into words, which, you know, I always treasure and relish moments late at night, especially when I get to come and stay with David and Gret in that lavish library. Is that shaping thoughts into words as if carving a way for a sculpture, you know, of things that was not need to be there, visible. And I just love that process. Yeah, it is a very slow, at times painful, because every time you talk to David, he reminds you that he's chained to the desk. It's probably an image in labor camp that I remember associating with. So it's very serious, deeply serious. It's a slow process of looking at works of art and then trying to account for our own experiences of that, trying to make writing next to them. This is when we know we never get tired of this precious experience, and that's what we do really. So when I was there teaching one particular graduate seminar, I managed to get all of my students to cross-pollinate and introducing them to those that I was teaching from the photo media and video film department at Charles Strauss graduate program, where I asked those from David's program to interview those artists from Charles' program. And in fact, they became friends. And one of the fundamental desire or request was to ask them to spend time looking at the work, to think about the artists after meeting them and learning how to interview them, just like the way the rail had done forever. You create a dossier. The more well-known the artist is, the more to digest, to read through, so that you don't repeat the same question. The regular questions: where were you born? Which school did you go? Or how much did your childhood contribute to who you are today? So we try to avoid questions that have been asked and focus on those that haven't been asked, adding on to the literature, to the thinking. And it was very, very exciting because many of them have become well-known writers and artists today. For example, the last issue, we feature Pacifico from Charles Strauss' program in pairing with Leanne Norman, for example, and many examples of that kind. And I just felt that's exactly what kept me so excited in the prospect of, furthering, cultivating art writing, art criticism, and it goes beyond the personal, universal sense, which I hope to elaborate a bit on later. So for now, that's okay for me, enough for now. So back to you, Charlie Nan.
Thanks, Fong. While you were speaking, I was remembering another line that I remember from Levi, which is that I don't really know what I think about an artwork until I've written about an artwork. Will Fenstermaker, we'd like to pass the microphone to you now.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everybody. I was a student at the program. I graduated in 2016, and I wanted to kind of tell a story of one of the first assignments Levi gave, and I think Malvika actually has images that relate to it. So I'll kind of pause while they come up. So, I don't recognize this one, but I think it'll, Levi, maybe you can chime in and let us know if these are other images, other artworks that have been used in the same assignment. But
that's right. Yeah, they were. This first one is Leon Gallup, and it's a small painting on paper, and it was one of the ones that I used, and also Stanley Whitney's painting that comes after. And then the ones that you remember, yeah.
Yeah, I think, for our class, I guess this would have been 2015. It was a blue saddle painting. I remembered it being red, but Levi, you corrected me and said it was blue, which we can maybe talk about how memory has changed the perception of the program. But there was a blue saddle painting by Gorchov and a piece by Kurt Ralsky. I hope I'm saying his name right. Who's another former student of the program. He'd excerpted stills from Carl Theodor Dreyer's The Passion of Joan of Arc. So it was a kind of motion capture study. And what happened is it was the first day of, I guess, the seminar. So maybe, day 2 or 3 of the program as a whole, our first class with Levi. And I in particular was very kind of nervous about the program. I had different ambitions for graduate school. I was thinking about doing an MFA in creative writing, and Levi just swayed me. I applied to the program somewhat on a whim, and he convinced me it was the place to be, and he was right. But I didn't know that yet. So I showed up very much not knowing what to expect. And the first day, he brought in 2 artworks from his car. I think he actually brought them from his personal collection and brought them into the seminar room and set them on the table. And in my memory, he left the room, but he may have actually sat there silently. I don't know, but just told us to write about it. Told us to just look at the works of art and write. And it was a hard thing to do. I wasn't familiar with either artist. It was very, very uncomfortable. And later, Levi, you underlined the parts that felt alive, I think was the phrase you used, the parts that feel alive. And anything that kind of like reeked of inherited wisdom, any kind of, received wisdom or academic insight was disregarded. The things that were underlined were the parts that really kind of bluntly communicated the effect of the object and its actual presence. And it was really revealing for me because it you know, what it helped me realize is that writing is writing about art, at least, is a physical thing first and foremost. It's something that begins in the eyes, and some kind of curious, mystical, indescribable process happens in the synapses between the eyes and the fingers that somehow gets translated into words. And then the rest of the program was, for me, a way of developing that kind of obscure mental process. And it took most people 2 years because of the program. So it took most people about 2 years to begin to develop that process, to be able to take some kind of visual stimuli and transmit it into language in a way that, as Anne mentioned, I think it was Anne, if it was someone else, forgive me, as Anne mentioned, does justice to a work of art, that extends its visual potency. I think in our class in particular, but probably the program as a whole, we've thought of bad criticism as a form of violence, in particular, of something that actually disrupts that process, and good criticism as a way of expanding it and adding to its dimensions. And that's not to say that you know, you of course can't say negative things about a work of art, but it all begins from a physical understanding of an object, and a sense of awareness of what actually happens when you share a space with an object. And so that, you know, that exercise was very helpful for me. And ever since then, you know, whenever I have writer's block, I tend to think of it as something that actually lives in my eyes. It's something that's actually happening in my eyes. It's a blockage I have to get around there, and always returning to advice that Levi gave, but also Nancy and Jennifer and everyone else in the program would say this: if you're having writer's block, it's because you haven't looked long enough, you haven't looked hard enough. So you have to go back and look more. There's no other way around it. I mean, so that's you know, there are many stories like that. I mean, Hakim's was very, very charming and enlightening too, but for me that was really kind of foundational. So I want to share that, because in the spirit of whatever comes after, whatever comes next, I think we'll have to account for that exactly. Whatever program takes on the mantle of nurturing the next generation of art critics, it has to begin from that same place. Otherwise, it's something else. And I think after me is, oh, sorry, go ahead, Anne.
Go ahead, no, keep going, Will, by all means, keep going.
Oh no, I was just going to say, I think after me is Jessica Holmes. But if you had something you wanted to say,
I just wanted to say that I was in the room with you that night, because that was my first class in the program as well, and it was Levi's class, and I was reading an email from you about that night when Levi left, when we had to choose a work of art, these two things that he brought in under his arm, you know, and on the table and write about. I just remember the excitement in the room, and the nervousness and the energy and the silence, except for we had to do it, you know, with a pen. So I had to apologize for my handwriting, but the sound of pens scratching paper as we delved into it. When I spoke with Levi about coming to the program, one of the things he said to me in that conversation was, in regards to art writing, you start with a work of art, and you can let yourself travel away from that work in the writing as you try to figure out what your thinking is. And you can let yourself get lost. When you get lost, you can come back to the art and always find your way home from there. And I think about that every single day that I write. I think, because I get lost a lot, I think about getting lost and not worrying, and the need for getting lost and knowing that you can always find your way back when you return to the art. So we are going to go to a video from Jessica Holmes, who couldn't join us. And so Malvika is going to facilitate that.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Anne. Will, I love so much what you're saying, and I think you're really coming to the heart of the question of, you know, how do we develop ways of seeing or modes of thinking? And I'm pulling up Jessica's video right now. Jessica couldn't make it. She's currently traveling and on the road, but she really wished she could be here in person, so she sent us her remarks, and here they are.
Malvika, I think we need sound for this. I'm Jessica Holmes, editor of the Art Tonic column for the Brooklyn Rail and a graduate of the art writing program at SVA, class of 2013. When I was a student in the program, the fundamentals of my writing were broken down and rebuilt from the ground up by the incredible instruction I received and by the talented peers who surrounded me. But just how deep the well ran became clear to me only much later when I became editor-in-chief in 2018 of Degree Critical, the department's online publication. Having the unique opportunity to pore through the publication's archive at leisure, reading and rereading the work of my colleagues, and working with each year's current cohort of students allowed me to witness firsthand the emergence and progression of dozens of gifted, thoughtful, and dexterous writers. In conjunction with the department's closing this year, along with my co-editors, Chita Masatikin and Loon Ames, I had the privilege of compiling a selection of these writings into the digital publication Holding Everything Dear. The link to this publication is available on the Brooklyn Rail's website. I hope you'll delve in and enjoy some of the most dynamic writing Degree Critical has had to offer over the past 15 years.
Share that link in just a moment. And I think next we'll be hearing from the lovely Emmanuel.
Hi everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here with you, and I'm speaking from Lagos, Nigeria, and I am very honored to be here with what I consider my intellectual family. So I'm going to read parts of the tribute I wrote for the Rail and just sort of add a few more thoughts. In January 2012, I was nudged by the wonderful photographer and organizer Eric Goetzman, who had been Levi's student at BAD, to apply to the program. After I was accepted and couldn't resume that fall due to financial constraints, Levi sent me a short essay he wrote at the prompting of Ivan Sandler. Dear Ivan, the essay began, "If it's not good writing, it can't be good criticism." Thus began my apprenticeship, nearly a year before I eventually resumed. That sentence, paraphrased from Walter Benjamin, became and remains a defining statement of my work. I needed a lodestar, and Levi, together with the eclectic group of writers and critics he assembled during my 2 years there, Claudia LaRocco, Nancy Priesenthal, Diane Lukic, Charles Steng, Lynn Tillman, Susan B., Thomas Beard, Jennifer Krasinski, and Susan Bell, provided an unforgettable and non-parallel constellation. I miss the library at the department. It is perhaps the room I spent the most time during my 6 years in the city. First as a student who had rented a terrible, terrible room in Washington Heights, and then as a faculty member. I sought every excuse to be there, to make copies of books, to meet with colleagues, to attend the Kyoto talks. And I now associate my learning with the solidity of the shelves, the breadth of the table, and indeed how invigorating it always felt to sit in Annette's office as though in a confessional. And I could say this also for Levi's, the times I spent with Levi in his office. Yet what I pay tribute to is the education I received. It was a composite experience, what it means to write well, to read widely, and what it means to see. I remember those 2 years of study as the freest in my writing life. I could submit a short story in lieu of an essay. I could write a thesis that blended criticism and memoir to produce a curious mangled form. In 2016, a mere year after I graduated, I received an unexpected gift, which didn't feel like one at the time, actually. One afternoon, Levi asked me if I wanted to teach the first writing practicum. I was stunned by the possibility of filling in for Claudia LaRocco, who had been my thesis supervisor and indeed a great teacher. And yet, because you don't say no to Levi, and also I was a Nigerian kid who needed the validation of a gig in America, I took it on. I didn't think that I had been, when I was a student, quite helpful. I was very shy and contributed very little during seminars. Now I had to teach other writers. And I can offer very little thoughts on my pedagogy. I just always felt that being curious and open was the way to teach. Combined my time as a student and then as a member of the faculty taught me where to locate my interest as a writer, in criticism as larger than the sum of its debates, in the mutability of genre, and most of all, in the possibility of being a writer in order to develop a moral muscle and an ethical stamina. Thank you.
You, Emmanuel. If it's not good writing, it can't be good criticism. I'd like to ask Jennifer Kabat to please share her thoughts with us.
Hi, I feel super lucky to get to be here with you guys today. And I have to say, intellectual family, just like Emmanuel was saying, totally. The program was kind of my North Star. It was really where I wanted to teach. And probably had it been around when I was growing up as a writer, it was where I would have wanted to go. And I remember when I was summoned to Levi's library, Jennifer Krasinski told Levi that he might want to meet me. And because I live upstate, I tootled over to Levi's library, which is, if you can kind of just zoom in on Levi behind you, this rather Gothic space. It's very church-like, filled with books. And I am somebody who is deeply, there we go, Levi. Levi in his face. I'm also somebody who's deeply allergic to dust. And so here I am with this person who I've really wanted to work with for a long time, kind of choking on dust and trying not to let on that I'm actually having an allergy attack because I so wanna come work with him. And he was, at the end, he was like, so come teach with us. And I was like, really? Me? Yes. So I felt really, really lucky. And just in the chat now, I'm looking at my notes. One of my students, who was also one of my thesis advisees, was like, you know, the program really saved my life. That community saved my life. And I will say for me too, because growing up as a writer at a certain point in time where I was really interested in art history, and as a teenager, like my heroes were Adrienne Rich and John Ruskin, I didn't have a model for the kind of writing that I do now. And I didn't have a home to go to. So I studied art history and started a PhD in art history and went to the Whitney program and then got an MFA in creative writing and fiction and blah, blah, blah. Like no kind of home, no place to do this hybrid form that became my form. And obviously the program is the place to do that. So at the point where I was teaching and writing this kind of writing, it was really thrilling to me to come to a place where the idea was that we could bend objects and bend our thinking and do this expansive, exploratory, essayistic writing. And that my job there was to facilitate and give other people the home for that kind of thinking and the openness for it. And so for that, I feel incredibly lucky. And I started teaching. Emmanuel had to go back to Lagos in the sort of midst of a personal tragedy. And I filled in for Emmanuel's class. And then the next year I taught writing one. But when I was there, I got to go to his class as a student one day, just as a way to meet the students. And it was the most fun I'd ever had anywhere, because I was just like, I got to be a student again, which is sort of what it felt like teaching there because of the intellectual curiosity that everybody was bringing to their work and the way that everybody formed a community and supported each other for thinking, that it felt like I got to think and learn with everybody in their process. So it was incredibly generative for me. And you know, it's like, the last thing I'll say is like, for me, the sort of like place to start from teaching is to teach this idea that the object can bend, that how you see an object isn't its reality, that your job as a writer is this very, very psychedelic job, that it is to present the way you see this thing, which has actually nothing to do with the reality of it. And that's about kind of breaking language and bending language and all of these things. And it was really exciting to be in a place where that psychedelic bending of the object, to go from description and what that is to how we might see things in a very expansive place, was allowed to flourish. And I hope we get to, continue that in some way. So Levi, thank you. It is so lovely to see you there. Emmanuel, thank you as well. And next up is Jennifer Krasinski, who I also feel very grateful for.
That was so beautiful. I am thrilled to be here with everybody. And Levi, thank you. Brooklyn Rail, everybody, thank you. So much of what I was about to share was exactly what Jennifer Kabat just shared. I was introduced to Levi in the spring of 2013 for a possible teaching position. I wasn't even sure quite which one, but Trini Dalton, who many of you may have studied with, sent me over to meet Levi, and I walk into the 6th floor and I'm utterly transfixed just by the library and the sort of vibe of people sitting around, reading, chatting with each other. And I looked around and Levi very kindly sort of showed me the library and told me about the Leo Steinberg books, and which blew me away because Steinberg had been so important to me as a young writer. And I think I even said to you, Levi, in that meeting, I said, if I could go back and do it all over again, I'd want to be a student here. And you kind of said, sort of nodded, and you said, well, that's kind of the point, right, of having you here. So I was very fortunate to teach from 2013 until the spring of 2021. And I have so many memories, really fun memories of the workshops that I led. And I wanted to take a moment, I thank Levi and I thank Annette, but I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge you students who came through for all those years. I don't think I could ever express what an honor and how wonderful it was to every week get to sit in a room full of minds like yours, open, eager, ambitious, and even on the days where we all were a little low, right around when thesis was due, things would get a little quieter. But it is the cliche of teaching, though it is not the truth of teaching, that you learn, that the teacher learns as much, if not more, of the students. But in this case, it was always the truth. I really walked away from those classes just feeling very grateful, truly. And the memory, I guess, I wanted to share apart from all of that, and this I offer in the spirit of the program and in anticipating the fact that I think one of the strengths of certainly workshop and certainly being among the colleagues that I was among was the quality of conversation. Just the crosstalk was always so lively and so energetic and fueled by a lot of passion. And so the memory I wanted to share was actually a memory of while I was teaching in that program, I would tell people, well, I'm art criticism, I teach art criticism, and so much of the time someone would say, well, how do you teach art criticism? And I understood what they were saying, like, how do you indoctrinate the young critic? Seems a little suspicious, right? So I would, mumble things about form and craft, but I also was kind of stumped because every year it was a new task, it was a new question. And so again, in the spirit of the program, I end my memory with a question that I hope we can return to when we all are, on screen and chatting together. So thank you. And I pass this now to Nancy Princenthal.
Wow. So what an interesting challenge to bring up the rear here. And I just want to basically say, yes, everything that everyone has said, I agree with that. And so many of the things that I've thought I might want to say at this moment have already been said, for which, in effect, I'm grateful, and also completely recapitulate the experience of being a teacher in this program, which is, I'm just sort of always with my ear to the wall, trying to hear all of the discussions that are going on around me. I share the experience of, the faculty who preceded me today, of having been a little stumped by being invited to teach in the program. I was fresh off 5 years of being a full-time editor when I started teaching in the writing program, although I had done years and years of teaching mostly to studio students. And the idea of teaching writing was something that I really had to give some serious thought to, and wasn't sure about how to proceed. But, as Levi said right at the outset, I latched onto the idea of knowing that I was comfortable working with writing in the raw, having just been a full-time editor, and also being concerned to focus on writers that I believed in myself. And so I proposed an elective, which I did teach every other year for, I think, more than 10 years, which is hard for me to believe. And it was based on and named after Susan Sontag's essay against interpretation, which was something of a manifesto for that elective. Let's see if we can write about art without interpreting. And pretty soon I learned from conversations that I was gleaning from students in my class that Susan Sontag was something of a mainstay for the program. And I think about it in retrospect as being a choice that anticipated my sense of there being two poles of discussion that were going on. And one was about, and this has been brought up by just about everyone who's spoken so far, especially the students. Let's look at the work. Let's start with the work and let's embrace the experience of it. We really don't want to find what the meaning buried in that object is. We want to explore the experience. So that was against interpretation. And we looked at that from a bunch of different perspectives. But then there was also, I knew very well, not at the beginning, but as the years went by, that Sontag's writing about photography was another pole of the program, and the enormous responsibility of thinking about images in the world, images that are driven by what was going on in the world. And one of the things about the program that I was aware of and grateful for is that Levi never taught as if we were in a little bubble that was, a place which, as we all know, did offer the comforts of the most amazing library on the planet, but was never meant to be a sort of bulwark against what was going on. And, over the course of the years that I taught at SVA, we lived through two pretty serious cataclysms. One was the election and presidency of Donald Trump, and then we ended with COVID. And I will always be grateful for being part of this community while those things happened, because the kinds of conversations we had in the classroom, even though very few of them actually directly addressed those things, took them into account as they were happening. There's no community that I would rather have been part of during those years. There's no community. Jennifer Krasinski, thank you so much for saying this. There's no community that I could have learned more from, and I'm still learning from. So, I did have the pleasure of getting a peek into the way Levi conducted his very first class today from Anne and Will. So I'm grateful for that. You always want to know what other teachers are really doing. I also want to say how grateful I am. It's just been an incredible experience.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you all for these really amazing, stimulating, heartfelt, thoughtful memories and anecdotes. I've felt my skin horripilate and my heart accelerate. I felt tears welling. I can feel the emotion through the computer, which is not something that I'm really accustomed to. I'd like to kick off our kind of roundtable discussion and allow us all to speak as we feel moved to speak. And the question that I would like to lead us into is actually the one that Jennifer Krasinski left hanging at the end. How did we go about teaching art criticism? I will pass that down to Jennifer just to give us some place to kick off from.
Yeah, I would be happy. I mean, I really did get that question all the time, and I think I would respond in two ways. I mean, criticism, as we know, has many forms, the most popular being the review. So on the one hand, we teach craft, right? We talk about an excellence in writing, the way to arc an argument. And I would say, in the past 5 years, the idea of the argument became much more powerful, certainly to me as a teacher and as a writer. because the world, the discourse of the world seemed to be flattening into just declarative sentence after declarative sentence after declarative sentence. The difference, of course, between argument and declaration, declaration somehow presumes that I am all the evidence I need for what I am saying. And criticism, of course, taking in the world as much as possible. So I'd love to hear maybe some formal comments from people. And then I would love to also talk about, you know, some of the more less teachable, or hopefully one role models, the way that a critic is a kind of way of being in relation to the world. And it actually doesn't necessarily have one particular form. There we go. Onward. I'm passing the talking stick, maybe to Levi, since this was your program. This was your big idea, after all. What did you...
Well, I mean, responding to something you said earlier, that, you know, not everyone thought this was such a good idea. One of the first things that happened was I ran into Dory Ashton at the Met, and she knew that I had just stepped into this role. And she just ripped me a new one. She said, "You can't teach criticism. How dare you? It's a terrible idea." And my response was, well, you can't, she said, "You can't teach somebody how to be a critic." And I said, well, you can't teach somebody how to be an artist either, but that hasn't kept us from forming thousands of MFA programs, one of which you've taught in for 30 years, because she was teaching at Cooper. But, you know, I think that attitude was, I have to say that the power brokers in the art world paid no attention to the program whatsoever. I mean, individual writers did a lot, but beyond that, it had no signature, it had no access or presence. So the question itself, you know, is it possible to teach this stuff? It was there all the time. And you've put it very well. You can teach the craft, you can teach how to form and how to think about a review and an essay. We concentrated on the essay as form primarily. You can do the craft. The other part of it is very contentious. And I actually wish that contention would have become more public. Like I say, we were pretty much ignored by the art world establishment. But you know, they're open questions. I feel pretty good about what we were able to do. Hearing from students, you know, it worked for a lot of people. It didn't work for everyone, but it certainly worked for a lot of them. And I'm proud of that. I mean, there are 112 alumni out there in the world writing and editing and teaching and making a difference, and that's not nothing. And it's, you know, it's all because of you.
I could maybe say that you know, one of the things that I found really difficult in some ways about trying to enter the writing world after the program was just this feeling that you know, so much of the forums for art criticism cater to very specific methodologies, and art criticism in many ways is a thing that other kinds of people do, right? I mean, you have like the academic tradition where people are writing art criticism in order to earn tenure and things like that. You have, you know, more journalistic tradition. You have a press and communications tradition, and you know, in some ways, I found myself, you know, entering this world where my only methodology was writing. I wasn't interested in the academic background. You know, came to this program to specifically not pursue that. had like some experience as a journalist, but not in art. Anyway, and you know, I think, I don't know if that's always been the case. If historically that's always been the case, that you know, good art criticism has come from this kind of like other space. But you know, Levi, what you're saying about the powers that be not really paying attention to the program, I think that might have been why. I mean, it came from somewhere else. It wasn't necessarily contrary to that world, but it didn't come through the kind of established pipelines, and that made it suspicious, right? But I think, I mean, that's what I learned, and what eventually made me able to kind of like operate in that world, was I realized that kind of suspicion is advantageous, that you can use that. You can actually, I mean, that's a helpful point of view for a critic to come from this, you know, maybe suspicion isn't the right word, but to come from this point of view where you're kind of kept at arm's reach. You're not necessarily given the you know, press line of thought that you just kind of are expected to regurgitate into good language. You're taught to do something else that a journalist can't do. I mean, I think journalism is incredibly valuable in the arts, but you know, the correlation of criticism is not direct. And ditto with academia. You're kind of allowed to operate in that zone and also outside of it. I don't know, that's very abstract, but yeah, I mean, G. Schwartz in the chat is mentioning Black Mountain College, and Levi, of course, the poetics program in San Francisco is very influential to you. I think there are other areas where that's been cultivated and allowed to grow, but you know, circumscribing that and describing that and giving that form outside of that like special incubator space is really, really hard, and requires much more than you know, the 10 of us or even the 112 have come to the program to be able to do that. And I think that's what lent it that kind of magical aura, that aura of being a special bubble, because it was.
You know, I always felt as a writer as well as a teacher, that the primary discussion was with the work, with the artist. And I think that is, I think it was a thread. I mean, I think it was a through line in the program. And Will, you've hit on, you know, just the two sort of boundary positions that we kind of tried to keep at bay. And one was what happens in journalism, which is useful, but not what the program was about. And the other, you know, is the kind of scholastic argumentation that art history has become, where in many cases where your discussion is with other art historians rather than with the artwork, right? And so I think that's something that maybe not explicitly programmatically, but in one way or another we supported or tried to support, which is just keep going back, you know, and you said this in relationship to Levi's advice, if, you know, let yourself get lost, but keep coming back to the object, to the artwork, you know, just what is that conversation about? And, you know, even if it doesn't have a place in the public realm, whatever that is these days, it's so confusing to me. It certainly has a place in the production of art, and, you know, in sort of that conversation that is, I think, worth holding on to, meaningful.
I'm interested in, you know, Jennifer, I mean, you know, the whole idea of thinking about what isn't being done and what can't be done, and where the limits are now, you know, both explicit and implicit. So where you talk about, you know, assumptions about declarative sentences and what they do, and how to think about that, and, you know, those kinds of boundaries. And I also think if I were teaching now, I feel like it's important to give students the right to be stupid, and the right to actually make mistakes, that they don't have to be right, you know, all the time. And the idea of even making mistakes, which we've all made, you know, God knows, as something that is fundamental to being able to learn from it and go with it. It seems like it's almost gone out of the culture. And I think a lot, I mean, the first course I taught at SVA was called Criticism and Risk. And I think a lot about this word risk, and think about the kind of value of continuing to go back to it. I mean, it's a difficult word, sort of a problematic word, and people will approach it and think about it in their own ways. But to really think about it with young writers and what it means and what they think it means, and what they think the possibilities are for writing that has a certain cost to it. You know, a cost to them as well as potentially to the culture. So I feel like, you know, these places of blockage that we're talking about, that we all feel, if we're going to go for teaching a course about criticism now, one way to begin is at least go towards that point, those points that have to be opened up a little bit.
I taught my last course was narrative as criticism, and it was precisely to open up a space for speculation, for risk taking and perhaps risk making. The idea that I thought I could introduce this sort of new genre into art criticism, which is to write narratives that would function in the same way that you know, a more traditional review or essay would, which was very scandalous, I think, even in my class. And I think that towards the end, or even now, what I understand about that process was that trying to teach, what I was interested in was trying to teach art criticism to writers walking outside of the art world. Was this possible? What could that mean? And this was precisely because I had come from, I guess, I don't know if it was very strange, but a non-traditional background. I'd never studied art or art history. I trained as a lawyer. I'd written fiction before moving to the US. And so once I came into the program, I was very interested in how to, in some way, disrupt what art criticism could be for me. And I struggled very much. And and my teachers would frequently tell me, this thing is not working. What are you trying to do? Why try to invent a character who is writing a novel, who is, you know, looking at paintings at the same time? Why not just look at the paintings and write about the paintings? But I think that process sort of resulted in this final seminar I taught, which was to present all this array of possibilities, which had looking, or the process of being in front of visual, you know, phenomena, whether films or paintings or photographs, and accounting for them in ways that were not, in a sense, what you traditionally expect in the art world. And so it became this whole, I guess to use Berger's word, smuggling operation, which I'm still, I don't know how many students who I taught are here, if they can sort of chime in to know if it succeeded, but it did. For me, yeah, it did become a real risk towards the end of my teaching career at SVA.
Thanks, Emmanuel. I noticed Vincent Katz has joined us, and I would love to bring Vincent into the conversation. Vincent, I'm going to hit the button to bring your mic on.
Okay. Can you hear
All
me?
right. Yes.
Oh, well, yeah, this is a great event, great occasion to think about this program and to honor Levi, really, quite frankly. Yeah, I was fortunate enough to teach in it for a couple of years. And just coincidentally, this week, my sons and I drove up to High Falls and we interviewed Levi in San Francisco. And, you know, so we've interviewed a lot of people over the years, Dianne Deprima and Bill Berkson and many others. And so in preparation for this, I read a lot of, Levi's published quite a bit about the poetics program at New College in San Francisco, which started in about 1980, and also, you know, Robert Duncan and other people associated with it. And just this experience of this reading and then speaking to him the other day really solidified for me this idea of lineages. Like it wasn't so clear to me before the role and the methodology of the poetics program at New College. So, you know, having thought a lot about Black Mountain College and experience of teaching in Levi's program at SVA, now it's sort of like I see, oh yeah, there's a really specific lineage. And I have also taught at Naropa University under Ann Waldman's leadership, and I've taught under Rob Storr. So these people, I feel like, really present alternative modes of thinking and working within this larger idea of I guess, cultural response. Like I wouldn't even call it criticism, so to speak, in the way that we normally think of criticism or the history of criticism. And I certainly, you know, maybe I didn't know that much about New College, but I certainly felt when I was there in the program at SVA, this, you know, it kind of emanated from Levi. It wasn't so much like one correct way to approach a work of art, and you know, reflected in the student body as well, because the students were coming from many different kinds of backgrounds. You know, some were poets, some were dancers, some were art historians, some were theorists, and it was a challenge to create a discourse, or, you know, an openness to discourse. And also I have to say, it wasn't always smooth sailing. I mean, there were times when the students would push back, and I kind of relished that in a way, you know. I'll just tell one quick anecdote where I brought in, I didn't even know how it came up right now, but anyhow, the idea of Allen Ginsberg came up, and I realized that, you know, for this younger generation, you know, an authoritative voice, let's say. And then so I said, oh, okay, well, I'm willing to take that in as a new thought for myself. But how many of you have actually read Allen Ginsberg? And they were, well, and not exactly, you know, I've read something about him. I said, okay, well, next class, what we're going to do is we're going to read Howl. We're going to go around the room. It'll take like, it doesn't take that long. It's about 20 minutes or 15 minutes or something. So we did that. And anyway, that is just one example of, I feel some of the openness among the students as well as the program itself. And yeah, I'm very grateful to have encountered it and take this opportunity to thank Levi for his leadership and his encouragement.
Yes, I totally agree. I thank you so much for sharing that, Vincent. Yeah, I'd actually also, I think this is a really good opportunity for us to take a look at some of the images that have been put together of the program. Maybe we can just kind of come through them. If anyone wants to speak about an image as it's on screen, by all means, just hop right in.
You know, I want to say something about this image. I love this image because it's Will sitting on the couch reading. I'm not sure who's at the table, but I'm so happy because that's actually my back and I don't know what I'm looking at, but I love that it exists.
That's Rula at the table, and I think
yes.
she's the only one who is actually legitimately working and not posing for the photo.
You and I are faking it. But what's also very funny is that the chair at the table that Rula is sitting at, that's right below the podium that says art writing, is the chair in which, or at least that's the spot in which Will sat every single day when he was writing his thesis. And I always thought at the time, and you know, if I had my way, this space would still exist, that a plaque should have been put there to say, at this spot, William Fenstermaker wrote his thesis.
I think many theses were written in that chair, but
when I was in the program, you were the one who was sitting in that chair. So like every morning you would come and you would write your thesis, and it was so great just to always see you there.
I love that carpet so much.
Yeah.
Oh, I wonder who got the carpet.
That carpet is now in my living room.
Excellent.
Oh,
Wonderful.
With all of our DNA in it, unless you've really vacuumed it, you know.
Yeah, I don't want to hear too much about that.
I love this photo. Jennifer said something, and I had the same experience about coming to the program, and you know, you're walking down 23rd Street, and then you're walking down 21st Street, and you get in an elevator, and you come out, and there's a glass door, and then you walk into this room. And I remember the first day I walked into that room, I was meeting with Annette, and I thought, whatever I have to do to be allowed into this room, I'm just going to do it. What is it, you know, what, just to be in this room full of books, full of, you know, and where Rula's sitting, those are all of Leo Steinberg's books, but just such an incredible energy and space. Oh, I love this photo.
Such a beautiful, warm space, and very inviting too. Also, the other part of that space, the other room with the computers, it had that very comfortable couch. I fell asleep on it one night.
Only one night.
Okay. I can only talk about one night.
You in this photo, Hakim, right by the ladder, the left, you're there, like the light is on your face. You're closest to the bookshelves. I think a bunch of us are in this room. This time. But yeah, the back room was sort of the living room, cozy room.
Yeah. And that was the first student in the department.
Right, right. That was the department. This image kind of became a signature of the program. Burroughs looking at a Brian Geisen painting with those weird glasses on.
Great photo.
I never knew that was a Geisen he was looking at. I remember writing about Burroughs and Geisen in my thesis, and that was totally unintentional. I didn't know that I was channeling this photo when I did that.
Absolutely, the third image, the third mind.
Subliminal.
Oh, there's
that's
Kurt Rowski's artwork. And that's Ron Gorchov's painting, that painting, and Kurt Rowski's piece, The First Day of Class.
And Levi, while I was putting together these slides, I was like really noticing that each of these artworks, the physicality of how your students are looking at them is so different in each one. You know, like this one, you're on the ground. This one, everyone's sloping up.
Yeah.
With the Burroughs, he has the special glasses.
There's a net with Dave Willis at graduation. And that's the SVA theater with when TJ Clark was talking about Picasso. I think that's Jess Holmes' baby.
Oh.
Amazing.
Is there a story behind this photograph?
I was just in an event that we had. I don't remember what the occasion was, and I think that's right. I think it's Jess's baby. I mean, she had a baby in the course of the program, who's now, I don't know how old she must be now. We had people born, we had people die in the program. a lot happened. And this is Jillian Jagger's work in the barn when we went to visit. Emmanuel and Teju Cole and me.
Can I just say that this was a very strange experience for me? Yeah, I had to perform like a certain kind of erudition.
Manuel, you were still a student at this point, right?
Yeah, I was going to graduate in like a couple of weeks. So. Yeah.
How did you manage to perform the erudition?
I can't remember. And the recording was lost or something, and someone didn't press record or something like that. So we don't have anything that I said on tape.
No, Teju didn't want it recorded.
Oh yeah, that's true. That's true. Right.
There are a lot of blackboards.
Yes, you and Joseph Boys, David.
Yeah, well, he was a little better at it.
That was actually part of the fun of the program, would be walking into the seminar room and looking at the blackboard and seeing what had been taught before I got there, like just knowing the hours before, the night before.
Yeah, super true, Jennifer.
Really beautiful thoughts, like almost a conversation is taking place here, also in Greek.
Yeah, some teachers would only erase half of it. So you'd have like two different classes and different panes. I remember Dayan would always try to keep thoughts that he liked intact and erase around them and make notes while leaving quotes that he liked intact. So it was a weird collage of thoughts.
Is that the last one?
Oh, Emmanuel.
Oh my God.
Just to mention that Annette now became recently the director at Canada Gallery. Also.
This is such a lovely image.
A beautiful image.
That was the graduation night, I think. That's a thesis presentation, yeah.
Wow.
There they are.
Yeah.
Alan Cotter.
Mm-hmm.
And Levi, is this the same event as the photograph of you and Jess Holmes's child?
I believe so, yeah. It's the thesis reading for whatever year that was when Aldrin and Alex were graduating.
2012.
Hold on, 2012.
Yeah.
Such beautiful portraits.
Yeah, this is actually Kurt Rowski took these portraits. Lynn Tillman, Leanne Norman.
Mm-hmm.
Charlie and I were talking yesterday, in preparation for this. There's Annette.
Annette, that's Annette in jury duty.
With Claude and Emmett.
No, this is long before that.
She
She had to take off because she got chosen for jury duty.
Oh, that's so funny.
This was proof.
Charlie and I were talking about Quixote Talks, which were monthly events in which Levi would invite a writer to come and speak with us. We can keep looking at the photos, but afterwards, in true Levi fashion, we would all move to El Quixote's in the Chelsea Hotel for this lavish dinner. And I was saying how incredible and thoughtful it was, that this wasn't just a place where you went into your seminar and you went into your class, you handed in your papers and you left, that there was this wonderful community, you know, that was formed within that beautiful space, but also that we got together and had these incredible meals, and it would be this very long table, and we eat paella and get up and move, and, you know, chit chat and get up and move. And it just meant so much to have those evenings and to have that, you know, continuous meeting of people from the, you know, who had previously been in the program or people who were new to the program.
I really want to second that, and I was just thinking that those meals at Quixote, they are some of the things that I feel like strengthened the bonds in the community. Levi had spoken earlier about the special relationships that were formed between the pupils and the professors, and how maybe at the baseline of those relationships was a trust. And I believe that those meals at Quixote went a long way to really enabling us all to be with one another as you know, inspired people, and for our relationships to become more complex than they would have been in any other sort of institutional setting. And how cool, we were in such a cool place. That was the other like really important thing.
It was so cool. It was so cool. You know, I was always waiting for Patti Smith to walk in, and I'm sure, you know, Levi could have made that happen because she would have been a perfect guest. But it was just this great, this feast. We would have this feast, and it would go on for hours, and we'd all chit chat, and it just, you know, it just created this closeness that was so important, you know, to form if the next day you were going to go in and read your experimental piece on, you know, what you saw this weekend, to have that sense of support and that sense of respect and you know, fondness for each other.
Yeah.
Malvika, can you keep showing? Yeah, because there are pictures of the dinners.
And look at this room.
They always gave us the Dulcinea room in the back. And people said that photograph on the wall, I mean, that portrait on the painted portrait on the wall was Annette. not Dulcinea.
I agree. It was Annette.
You know, as we're looking at this image, Quixote we can't go there anymore. The restaurant is closed. Levi, you had said in the beginning that the program wouldn't have worked just anywhere, but I think a lot of us can attest to the fact that it worked really well in New York City in the early 21st century. And I'm wondering if anyone can put a finger on why this city in this moment in time, we were able to have such generative experiences.
Well, I can just say a few words about that. Initially, David didn't want to take the job, Charlie. You know, I kind of talked him into it, succeeding Tom McCaverly, because he was very comfortable and happy where he was in his life, teaching at bar, writing in his beautiful, lavish library, had many books in mind, working all along simultaneously. But I don't know. I think I wanted to stress on what Vincent mentioned about lineage, which is a very important word. Can we go back to the gallery so we see everyone's faces for a second? I think it's a very important word because just as Vincent, when he wrote the book on Black Mountain College, all the poets, all the artists was teaching as if they are learning whatever the subject they were teaching to the students. So there was a simultaneous, ongoing collaboration, so to speak. It's very important to the way that, in a way that you all experience it at the program. And I would say that one thing that I always remember that we share this deep affinity about lineage in the sense that who Robert Duncan was to Levi is identical to who my superior was to me. We share that lineage very deeply, very profoundly. And I remember once talking to Meyer, you know, not that long before he died. He died in 1996, so probably a year before he passed away, about writing and criticism. And I remember, you know, we talk about historical memory. So either you remember by writing it, or you remember by memorizing that you love. You know, and I remember he encouraged me to do so. And I, you know, memorizing is not a big deal for me because that's how it was taught growing up in Vietnam. You know, so I remember clearly Shapiro, who have a brilliant memory, immediately pointed out it's somewhere between this collision, and he quoted Edward Young, 18th century British poet, who once said, "We are born originals, but why is it that so many of us die copies?" And then between that, and then he countered that by offering Apollinaire avant-garde attitude, where he said, even if nothing is new under the sun, the new spirit does not refrain from discovering new profundities in all this that is not new under the sun. So there was a tension between, you know, that lineage that is so important. And I want to also follow what Jennifer saying earlier, you know, Kabat, Jennifer Kabat, when she mentioned about her favorite writer being Ruskin, you know? And I just quoted last night at the panel with Jassy Alapour and Simon Morgan, where Ruskin say nothing that lives is or can be rigidly perfect. Part of it is decaying, part nascent. Or admit irregularity as they imply change, and too banished imperfection is to destroy expression, to check exertion, and to paralyze vitality. So these are kind of things somehow coming together in this forum where we can talk about the importance of writing, because I remember, as we all remember, Vermeer was not at all that appreciated during his lifetime, and for a long, long time, something like nearly 270 something years, you remember, was neglected until the writing of Theophile Berger, remember the French critic, 18th century? He wrote on him in his second book, the volume of the Museum of Holland, that was in 1850 something, today I don't remember. All of a sudden, he came back to life. The same thing applied with Piero della Francesca. I don't know how many years that is, probably also just as long, even longer, maybe 300 something, 58 or 9 years. And that was because the Impressionists discovered all the writings, beautifully writing, and Piero came back to life. So that's just a few examples. I don't know, I think that's what we do. And I think it hopefully go beyond New York City, Charlie. And there's an advantage to keep the rail free because you don't have to buy anything. So that's why it circulates. The writing has a place finally. And I don't know, we're reaching nearly 3 million readership. So it really has broken the record, and all the writing is available. So there's a future, David. You know, even the program came close to an end with this celebration. There's a future because many of whom who have taught there and had studied there is now writing for us. So Nancy's been one, Yuan being the other, Charlie, and hopefully we'll get Jennifer and everyone else's contribute. Vincent has written. So the future is fantastic. So get back to, so thank you, David. Thank you all. Back to you, Charlie, Nan.
Thanks, Fong. Thanks, Fong, so much. I think in the spirit of what Fong was saying about the relationships between the audience and the reader and the writer, I would really love to take the opportunity now to bring in some of the questions and voices from the audience who's been filling up the chat with all manner of warm thoughts and interesting questions. Malvika or Nick, can I hand it to one of you two to cycle through those?
Yes, perfect. Thank you, Charlie, and thank you everyone. This has been fantastic. I do have to say, Jennifer Kabat and Michael Brenson had to leave to their next appointment, but they both sent all their love and regards. We've really enjoyed having you all in this special space today. Our first question will come from Jamie Kiesling. And I will, Jamie, you should be able to turn on your microphone now.
Hi, thank you. It's so great to hear from everyone. So in the spirit of maybe gathering some intel from the experts, I'm wondering if, I'd be really curious to hear people's thoughts about, or criticisms of art criticism. What are some, how might we think about the responsibility of the critic? What are some of the most urgent demands that remain unfulfilled by art criticism? This is kind of a broad question, but essentially critique of criticism.
Honesty. I think that's lacking in art writing. And this goes back to, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Goes back to Jennifer's question. Maybe there isn't a way of teaching art writing to people, but there certainly is a value in teaching people what not to write or how not to write, like common sense, like vanity, indulgence, dishonesty, or inaccuracy. These are things that the program helped me avoid. And the way I look at it, it wasn't an institution that teaches you how to write about art, really. It was more of an institution that a group of accomplished writers who are the teachers who are coming here and generously helping you to find your voice. And finding your voice, it's a very elusive thing, of course, and it takes so much effort. It also involves a lot of unlearning and separating yourselves from notions of the way you should be writing. So it involves being closer to the self, being more yourself as you write, and really let yourself be abducted by the artwork. And when you do, you kind of transcend beyond it. And there you find yourself. So I think that the program was a great gift in that sense. And I'm personally very grateful for the generosity of my teachers, including Nancy and Jennifer, who were so amazing, who all they did was help you be true to yourself and find whatever it is that you might call your voice.
I love that, Hakim. I love the idea of being adopted by the artwork. It resonates what Will was saying earlier. If I have a writer's block, because I don't look hard enough or look many times that it needed enough, that require. So that's just terrific.
I'm still struggling with the notion of how to even look at art, Funk, because when you go to a gallery, you have such limited time. You're standing, it's not comfortable. And you don't have enough time with it. And there's so much interruptions. That's actually an issue that bothers me a lot, how to see art before even getting to the writing part of it. And perception is such a shallow thing because what you get is an imprint of the thing that you're seeing for a single, for a few seconds. And they say that the average length of the time that people look at an artwork is just 30 seconds or less. Some even say 5 seconds. And it's hard to fight that.
Hakim,
I think even things like we need more benches in galleries. People need to sit and spend more time with the artwork.
Hakim,
So,
I'm going to give you a gift, okay? I give you away my secret. When I go to look at art in gallery, I bring this thing with me.
Oh, that's great.
This is what construction worker use on the street, Hakim. You put it in, you don't hear anybody, and people recognize that you're there to look, so they don't even bother talking to you. They leave you alone. It's excellent tool. So I'm gonna get one for you as a gift, okay?
that's a good idea. I did think of playing music. Yeah.
And I'm thinking of, Malvika, your observation of just the photos, the kind of like physical, the physicality around all of us, like sitting with the artworks. And I don't know, Hakim, I agree, it's tricky. And I feel like so much of writing the last 5 years or so has been to try and kind of get back to that place where we really did have a very even when you're like very first confronted with an artwork, it was very intimate. I mean, maybe that was partially for me because I was relatively new to it. I was coming from literature. I frankly didn't know that much about art, so it was still kind of fresh and interesting for me. But I don't know, there really was this sense of I don't know the right word, but it was a physical, like a deep physical connection with work that I think is part of also what's missing in a large part of art writing today, where it's over intellectualized, or it's kind of fit within a kind of pre-existing mental framework that's kind of laid over top of artworks, and group shows that are kind of curated to illustrate a curatorial theme as opposed to extracting a concept from the work itself. That, I think, for me, when I think back to the program, it really does come out of that kind of physical relationship with a work of art. The fact that you can kind of, I don't know if Levi would have liked us like poking the Gorchov, but there was this sense that it was a part of your life. You could touch it, you could kind of be around it, you could think about it in a way that it different from the way it hangs in a museum or a gallery. I don't know how to get that back, short of Fong mailing headphones to everybody or handing them out the door to museums or something like that. But I don't know. I guess I'm not really sure how to answer your question, Jamie. But that definitely feels like an aspect that's missing, and that I would love to see somebody think of a way to bring about at scale.
I think too. Go ahead. Oh, I think too of something that Dianne once said. Dianne Lukic in his class was giving out an assignment. It was like 3 to 5 pages, and he said, "So 3 to 5 pages. I want you to invoke in me an hallucinogenic experience, and that see you next week." Just this idea of writing beyond, as you say, Will, the academic or the over intellectualized declarative statements, that something would happen in the writing, just in the same way that something would happen in your experience of the art and standing in front of a work. What goes on, and getting back to that hallucinogenic experience. Or Levi saying once that when he goes into he said, I go into museums because I don't go to church. I don't know, Levi, if you want everyone to know that, but that a museum is church, and that mystical feeling that you get in a museum or in a space where there's, where work is present. I think so much of those kinds of thoughts were brought up in that program, and it's funny stuff to talk about, but it's really at the heart of criticism and writing, and sort of engaging through the written word with something that's a little bit beyond language, building that bridge towards that experience.
Thank you so much, Anne, Will. Everyone, I know that we have a couple of questions left, and maybe we can just cycle through them really quickly. The first will come from, so first we heard of Emmanuel sharing his experience as a student, then a teacher. Now we'll hear from one of his students, Catherine. And Catherine, you should be able to turn on your microphone now.
Hi, yeah, I was a student of the program in the very last year of its existence, which is a really particular experience. And the entire second year, part of the first year was online. And I still count myself as extremely fortunate to have been students to so many of you here today. And I guess thinking about Emmanuel's comments and a lot of what we've talked about today, and also what seemed to emerge as a pressing question for my cohort in the last several months is how we can build forms of community through new forms in writing. Many of our classes and many of the people in my cohort were working on projects that pushed at form as an explorative and worthy cause to uphold. And I guess both as we conclude today and as I'm thinking about next steps for all of us. How can form become a generative possibility for community? And yeah, and I'll just say once more, thank you so much to each of my teachers. And this program was like my political education, my aesthetic education, and my personal lifeline in so many ways.
Thanks, Kate.
Thank you so much. For our next question, we'll go to G.E. Schwartz. And G.E., you should be able to turn on your microphone now.
Yeah, initially I thought maybe I'd be asking a question, but I'm almost thinking maybe it's more of a comment and of praise to what it seems as though the program, which I didn't know that much about until the last few years, really did. And it seems like, at the essence, it seems like in writing reviews, which are as much as essay as criticism, and it seems that the writer and in turn the reader kind of came away with an experience of a renewed feeling of maybe having been granted an extra sense of life, and maybe that's what the school did, and maybe that's what it taught did, and that's what the people who came out of it hopefully will continue to do. So thank you, though. I just appreciate it today so much.
Can I ask one last thing? You know, it changes your perception. That's what writing does. It's in essence, you know, you might read 10 different review or writing on a work of art of an artist. It just every time you read the new, you know, insight by some writer, you might be subject to what I love, what Hakim said earlier, adopted by the writing now. So from being adopted by a work of art, you can equally vulnerable to be adopted by writing, you know, GA. And we have experienced over and over again. I was talking to a friend the other day about John Pope Hennessy, first book on Uccello. And I remember clearly he described in the Battle of San Romano, the three famous triptych now in National Gallery, London, and one in the Louvre and the one in Uffizi, how he say, even the horses managed to die in perspective, you know? So these are kind of things that changes and advance you to understanding the mindset, the conceptual framework, how Uccello came to be doing the painting that he did. So these are, you know, we constantly go further back and traverse through time. You know, we still read Ruskin as much we read Michael Brenson or Nancy Princenthal and other. One thing I must say about Jamie Kislin earlier, and that's go to also Hakim and Will. I think the idea of being taught not to read the book that you don't need to read, that's okay, that's terrific. But also, equally, sometimes you can find things in the bad books as well. You know, I was talking to John Curran now. He told me it will be published in September issue. He said he never studied the master himself. He always studied the second tier, the one that didn't manage to become a master, where the mistake is more revealed and he learned from. It's harder to direct that experience to the near perfection of the master, you know, so it's a similar thing. But the other thing is, you know, you have to write repetitively, almost every day. It's like an athlete. You know, you have to do it in order to develop a sense of who really read your work. You have to envision a readership. So those who write and publish regularly get that pleasure to know and rapport, creating that rapport with the reader. And they have a certain impact in perpetuate, in return, the criticism of criticism. Exactly what she asked the question earlier. You can't really live in your head and write twice a year in order to, you know, to have that pleasure receiving from the tail end. But that's it. That's my, I've been talking way too much.
Oh no, it's a life form.
Yeah, yes.
You agree with that, with one of the points you mentioned, and that's to answer your question, Jamie, is that so many art writers, unfortunately, write for their peers and not for their readers, or write for the next, award or prize and not for the readers. We need to write for our readers. That's all.
Love that so much. And thank you, Hakim. Thank you, Fong, for closing us out in such style. I think we should move ahead to poetry. So as is our tradition at the Rail, we always end with a reading. And today we have the maestro, clearly of the world of letters, both poetic and critical. So I'm so pleased to be able to pass the mic back to David Levi Strauss.
Thank you. I'm going to keep it short. I'm just going to read a couple of selections from my teacher that I talked about before, Robert Duncan. This is from a 17th century suite. Yes, there is a teaching that I know, slow, even as time alone erodes the matter. I turn and turn upon my life. Though I resist the learning, the drive to study it out returns. I hold to this, and this holds me. And there is freedom in so taking hold each time. In the old stories, the protagonist learns what time has to do with him. In his true identity burns within the learning. And in his true identity burns within the learning. He serves the years. And from another one of my teachers, Dianne Deprima, who the Rail is going to do a tribute to next Wednesday with a number of poets and people who knew Dianne. Dianne was a magnificent teacher. This is from Revolutionary Letters, and it's Revolutionary Letter number 33. How far back are we willing to go? That seems to be the question. The more we give up, the more we will be blessed. The more we give up, the further back we go. Can we make it under the sky again? In moving tribes that settle, build, move on, and build again. Owning only what we carry. Do we need the village? Division of labor, a friendly potlatch a couple of times a year? Or must it be merely a cybernetic civilization, which may or may not save the water, but will not show us our root or our original face? Return us to the source. How far forward is back are we willing to go after all? Thank you. Thank you all for coming.
Wow, thank you so much. And thank you so much, everyone. Hakim, Emmanuel, who had to leave, Will, Michael, Jennifer, Kabat, and Krasinski, Nancy, and of course, thank you, Charlie, and thank you, Anne. This has been such a wonderful example of cultural generosity and such a blessing. Thank you, Levi, for bringing us all together and opening up the space so beautifully. And please join us again tomorrow for No W here, Alice Hope, Bastian Smith, and Tony Ross, when we're joined by those three artists in conversation with Rail contributor David Rhodes. We'll close with a reading of some verses, again by Dianne Deprima, again in a kind of sneak peek and preview of our radical poetry reading next Wednesday, August 25th at 1 p.m. Eastern. Please join us. We do this program every day at 1 p.m. And other than that, thank you all so much. This has been so fantastic. And I'll invite you to turn on your microphones in case that you would like to say hello to each other, goodbye on your way out, or anything you feel compelled. But this has been truly so special. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
you.
Thanks, Hakim. Thanks, Nancy, Will.
Thank you.
Vincent, I'm so glad that you could join us.
Thank you, David.